That's a tricky question. Any kind of intelligence manifests as behavior, and behaviors are the result of traits that have been selected by evolutionary processes or learned throughout one's lifetime. We aim to explore this question through a specific skill that, until recently, was thought to be unique to primates: tool use. We are going to investigate tool use as a specific iteration of intelligence, because tool use requires flexibly shaping one's behavior to solve a problem posed by the environment. Our subject of interest is the crow. Crows display a number of seemingly intelligent behaviors, but they are a particularly notable case in the phenomenon of tool use.
Crows belong to the order of passerines, unofficially known as songbirds. Their family is Corvidae, which includes ravens, rooks, magpies, tree pies, choughs, blue jays, jackdaws, and nutcrackers. Crows belong to the genus of Corvus, which includes ravens, jackdaws, and rooks. Concerning tool use in the genus Corvus, Kenward et al. In 2010 suggests that a possible precursor to tool-oriented behavior was caching, or food-storing behavior. In caching, an animal has to know food is hidden, and the act of caching itself involves placing objects into enclosed spaces, which is how tool-using crows use their tools to forage.
Specifically, one of the most advanced tool users is the New Caledonian crow, a species of corvid that lives on 2 islands of New Caledonia, Grande Terre and Marais. These crows are known for using a variety of plant tools to obtain prey that is normally out of reach. Their tools come in 3 varieties made from the pandanus leaf: non-hooked tools, hooked tools, and step tools, as well as stick tools made from tree branches. To retrieve their prey, they use a process called larva fishing, where crows repeatedly poke larvae that live inside holes in candlenut trees. The larvae are poked until they become aggressive and bite the end of the tool, at which point the crow can carefully remove the tool, along with their tasty meal. New Caledonian crows convergently evolved tool use abilities with primates. Convergent evolution means that any similarities in traits can be explained by similarities in environmental pressures, as opposed to any characteristics found in a common ancestor. For example, both birds and bats fly, but if you look at the bone structures in the wings, they are very different. The fact that corvids and primates have distantly related phylogenetic histories means that the traits developed for tool use evolved separately. So part of our aim is to examine what traits exactly, if any, neurobiological, morphological, or ecological, in the New Caledonian crow evolved convergently, and what that means for how we think about the so-called intelligence of tool use.
When we study something as complex as tool use, it's currently impossible to identify the exact patterns of neural activity that produce the behavior. Nevertheless, neuroscience can help us understand the physiological constraints on tool use and the extent to which so-called higher-order cognitive processes are involved. Years of research have identified key brain regions in other species that are necessary for learning, memory, motivation, planning, decision-making, and fine-tuned motor control, all the cognitive functions we would expect to be at work in tool use. Furthermore, if we can translate a behavior into its neural substrate, then comparing brains across species can yield insight into the evolutionary origins of the behavior. So let's look at some brains. The crudest way to measure intelligence in animals is by brain size. This chart from an old allometry study compares brain mass and body mass across different vertebrate species. For most animals, the brain-to-body mass ratio lies on a predictable regression line. However, crows lie above the line, with a brain mass that is a few grams greater than what would be expected. Thus, crows have a larger brain than would be predicted by body size alone. In fact, corvids and some types of parrots have the largest brain-to-body mass ratio of all 10,000 known species of birds. Humans and other apes top the charts with the highest brain-to-body mass ratio of all animals currently living. Of course, this kind of rudimentary correlation does not tell us anything about what increased relative brain mass means in terms of neural computation. Recent studies have revealed that the corvid brain has twice as many neurons as a mammal brain of the same size. So even though corvid brains are small, for a given amount of brain mass, a corvid brain will pack in twice as many neurons. For example, a crow and a marmoset monkey are perfectly matched in body size, and as expected from the brain-to-body mass ratios for primates, the monkey has a larger, heavier brain. However, the crow has a greater number of neurons that are packed more densely than the monkey's. As a result, the crow has a greater absolute number of neurons in the brain, especially in the forebrain. And what is the forebrain? That's our next point. The forebrain is the evolutionarily newest part of the brain in both birds and mammals. Basically, it's this outer part that mushrooms out of the brainstem. In primates, the outermost part of the forebrain is the cortex, which is defined by distinct layers of neurons. But birds have no cortex, no layers. Still, crows are able to perform many of the cognitive functions commonly attributed to the cortex in mammals. So when we compare the brains of birds and mammals, we're looking for functional rather than structural homologs. An important homolog in the forebrain is called the Nidopallium caudolaterale, NCL for short. The NCL is often called the avian prefrontal cortex because, like the prefrontal cortex in primates, it's thought to be a crucial site for production of so-called executive functions like planning, judgment, and behavioral inhibition. Similar connectivity patterns between the NCL and the PFC may explain why these structures have control over other behaviors. They are both centers of integration for ascending sensory information from the external world and descending motor commands for behavior. Electrophysiological studies in crows have shown that NCL neurons encode the value of stimuli when crows are performing complex tasks, such as flexibly applying rules, identifying categories, and postponing behavior. Both types of brains have similar dopamine signaling between midbrain areas and forebrain areas, which encodes the value of learned stimuli and is the most well-known neural substrate for classical conditioning. More similarity in function can be found in the way that information is processed in the cortical layers of primates. While it's true that all birds lack a layered cortex, the avian forebrain does contain distributed clusters of neurons called subfields that, overall, create a similar network of connections for processing of sensory information. It's important to note that the similarities in function between corvid brains and primate brains has only recently been recognized, largely due to the ongoing research with crows. Previously, it was thought that most of the avian forebrain was like a primitive version of our midbrain. Now, the favored view is that the forebrain of crows and other songbirds and the forebrains of mammals have a large degree of resemblance. What does all this mean in terms of tool use? While the neuroscience of tool use has not been studied in crows, they possess the same kinds of neural substrates that are known to be involved with tool use in primates. The most recent common ancestor of crows and primates was an amniote from 300 million years ago. This lizard-like creature had only a very rudimentary brain, similar to the evolutionarily old brainstem that each one of us currently possesses. Its brain lacked all of the fancy neural machinery that we've been looking at. Yet, over 300 million years, both crows and mammals evolved to have homologous traits in connectivity, neurochemistry, and resulting function in the forebrain. So what has our avian neuroscience investigation taught us about crow intelligence? Crows should be added to the short list of intelligent animals? Not really. If anything, we've seen that the neuroanatomical features that people have been citing for years as the seat of superior human intelligence, a large brain-to-body ratio, an organized layered cortex, need some serious re-examination. The forebrains of tool-wielding crows and tool-wielding primates have independently evolved homologous mechanisms of neural computation. Their common ancestor lacked these traits. Therefore, what we can say is that the neural substrates underlying tool use in these animals are products of convergent evolution.
It is not just the brain and neuroanatomy that allows crows and other animals to use tools. If you do not have the dexterous appendages needed to find, make, or use tools in the first place, your brain alone will not be much help. Ergo, tool-using animals will have specific physiologies shaped for and shaped by the use of tools. In the New Caledonian crow, two of these morphologies are large, forward-facing eyes and a short, straight beak. New Caledonian crows hold tools generally in two ways: an angled grip, where the non-working end sticks out of the beak and is pressed up against the cheek, and a straight grip, where the non-working end rests inside the mouth. New Caledonian crows generally prefer the angled grip, and their large forward-facing eyes allow them to see the working end of their tool with both eyes as they probe for food. Non-tool-using crows do not have nearly as much binocular visual overlap, so if a bird like the carrion crow tried to use a tool like the New Caledonian crow, it would have much more difficulty seeing the working end of its tool with both eyes. The short, straight beak of the New Caledonian crow allows for the tool to be held as parallel as possible to their eye lines. Most other non-tool-using corvids have beaks that are curved at the tip. If these birds tried to hold a tool in their beaks, then their tool would either have to stick out from the side of their beak, like so, or it would have to curve downward along the tip of the beak, like so. Both of these alternatives would impact the ability for the crow to see the working end of the tool, and both would affect the ability to securely hold the tool in place during use. Woodpecker finches also use tools habitually in the wild, but they have to hold their tools like this, in line with the tip of their curved bill. Because of this, they do not possess the same fine manipulation skills as the New Caledonian crow. The shortness of the New Caledonian crow's beak increases the strength of its grip and helps it to protect against all of the forces that act upon the beak, which could potentially damage the nasal passages. Matsui et al. In 2015 suggests that the architecture of the New Caledonian crow's beak could have developed as a direct response to the pressure and leverage forces that act upon it during tool use and manufacture. The lack of a solid fossil record for the New Caledonian crow, however, makes stating the exact emergence of these traits difficult. Could we say that the New Caledonian crow's beak is comparable to a human hand? Well, let's give it a shot. Like the New Caledonian crows, to To be an effective tool-manipulating hand, the grip must be both precise and forceful. In humans, the hand's fingers are short relative to thumb length in comparison to other primates. The thumb, first, and second fingers share relatively equal amounts of pressure when gripping and using stone tools, and it is the posture of the hand that affects the amount of the pressure felt. The thumb itself has larger muscles that give it more movement and a stronger thumb-to-finger opposition force. These two factors produce a distinct pinch grip that is effective at both using tools and minimizing injury to the fingers, analogous to the strength of the New Caledonian crow's bill. So now we have covered the brain and the body, but does this mean that these animals, crows and primates, were built to use tools? Maybe. In comparison to other animals, these physical traits give them an extra boost in dexterity, but dexterity has necessity outside of tool use. For instance, the elongated hand found in chimpanzees seems to be shaped more to their need to grasp branches and swing in trees instead of specifically using tools. When we actually look at tool manipulation in chimps, we see that they are nowhere near as dexterous, and both hands are needed to effectively grip and resist the forces acted upon the tool that they use. Furthermore, just because an animal has the dexterous morphologies needed to use tools, it doesn't mean that the tool use will become a natural part of the animal's repertoire. We see the ability to use tools in other members of Corvus species, such as rooks, which possess a greater range of binocular overlap and have relatively straighter beaks than other corvids, though rook tool use is not something you tend to see outside of captivity. Let us posit this hypothetical question. If a city-living American crow had all of the physical traits of the New Caledonian crow, would it still rely on tools as heavily as the New Caledonian crow? We think not. After all, food is far more accessible in the city, so why would you use a tool if you could just find a trash can? The ability to use tools does not a habitual tool user make. This type of difference in need can also be seen in some of our hominid ancestors. The ability to craft handled tools was found in both early modern humans and Neanderthals, but the early modern humans had hands better suited for making and using them. What could have accounted for this difference? The importance of such technology within their species, which can be evidenced by the morphology of the muscles and the hands and arms. But what makes a tool so important for one particular animal? It cannot be solely related to morphology. Morphology does not happen on its own, and morphology alone is not the only factor involved in the usage and development of tools. We are still missing a third component. The environment will determine how much you rely on this morphology, and in turn, the morphology will reflect the challenges your environment provides. It is the environment that becomes a driving force in the selection of both physical and neurological traits, as well as the behaviors that coincide with them.
Ecological pressures, then, would appear to have a large effect on the development and honing of tool use in New Caledonian crows, or in any animal. In some ways, we can think of intelligence as being a result of increased selective pressures or especially favorable environments that foster certain types of behavior. For New Caledonian crows, there are three main ecological factors that led to their development of tool use. These are the presence of a nutritionally profitable food that is also out of reach, a lack of tool-using competitors, and a low level of predation risk. The first two work in conjunction to create an empty woodpecker-like niche for New Caledonian crows to fill. The last factor facilitates tool use in two ways. First, their cognitive load may be decreased because there's less selection for anti-predator traits, such as vigilance and neophobia. This allows them to dedicate more time and energy to exploring and interacting with new objects. Second, because their mortality rates are lowered, they would develop life histories that are rooted in a slow juvenile development period, which in turn leads to delayed reproductive maturity, prolonged parental care, and increased lifespan, all of which are associated with cognitive adaptations. So we have these three factors. How have they manifested in these crows' lives in such a way that reliance on tool use was the result? Well, the presence of a nutritionally profitable food comes in the shape of the longhorn beetle. These guys are found in abundance in New Caledonia, and their larvae burrow into the native candlenut trees. Studies have found that in comparison to other food sources, longhorn beetle larvae make up a disproportionately high amount of a New Caledonian crow's lipid intake, and are also a great source of protein. And the crows only need around 3 larvae to satisfy their energy needs for an entire day, so these little bugs are an extremely potent and profitable source of food. As for the lack of competitors, New Caledonian crows don't have to compete with other tool-using animals such as woodpeckers, monkeys, and striped possums, who all don't live on the islands. There is an abundance of concealed prey, and in combination with the lack of unconcealed prey, this makes tool use to retrieve that concealed prey a very beneficial and relatively profitable source of food compared to other foraging methods. Lastly, New Caledonian crows only really have one main predator on the islands, and that is the goshawk. Ecological pressures are inherently linked with evolution to conform to and make the best use of an animal's environment. In New Caledonian crows, given that they are a rather new species of interest for tool use, their evolutionary origins are a bit tricky to pin down. However, we can look at some possible factors, such as the history of the 2 trees that are most important to them. Pandanus trees, which are used to make their pandanus tools, are largely endemic to the islands. Candlenut trees, the habitat for the longhorn beetle larvae, may have been introduced by humans about 4,000 years ago, so it seems that their ecology has remained in this favorable condition to foster tool use for a long time. The link between ecology and evolution doesn't just go for crows. In another tool-using order of animals, primates, the environment also plays a role for their tool skills. And given that their closest ancestor to the New Caledonian crow is way down the phylogenetic line, their tool skills have evolved separately, but have resulted in the same behavior. In the primate order, all apes use tools, and there are 4 who use them in their natural environment: the chimpanzee, Sumatran orangutan, bearded capuchin, and Burmese long-tailed macaque. We'll focus our comparison on the chimpanzee. These primates create tools from vegetation, very similar to the New Caledonian crow. One of their main examples of tool use is extremely similar to what the crows do with the beetle larvae. For chimpanzees, their food of interest is termites. Just like the crows, stick tools are made from careful tearing and ripping of pandanus leaves. Chimpanzees also strip down sticks to create termite fishing probes, which they use to extend their reach and poke at termites in their mounds. In addition to using tools to retrieve food, chimpanzees also use stones in several capacities, including as a hammer for additional strength, missile for extending reach, or signal enhancer for social displays. Evolution-wise, there are many theories as to why tool use developed among the great apes, and across tool-using animals as a whole. One is the necessity hypothesis, which predicts that tool use developed as a response to a scarcity of resources. Another is the opportunity hypothesis, which predicts tool use being a result of extended exposure to favorable conditions, as appears to be the case for the New Caledonian crows. And then there is the invention hypothesis, which predicts that tool use was spread through social and observational learning. In a study conducted on chimpanzees in the Gualago Triangle of the Northern Republic of Congo, it was found that the necessity hypothesis may not be at work in these chimpanzees. Instead, tool use was used to maintain a steady supply of embedded food throughout the year in support of the opportunity hypothesis. Termites, like the longhorn beetle larvae, are also very nutritional, containing manganese, protein, and amino acids, though more research is needed to determine its benefits further. More recently, a large factor for the chimpanzees' tool use has been as compensation for missing resources that have been used by humans, specifically their use of oil palm trees. Lastly, the invention hypothesis had mixed support, with only a subset of chimpanzee individuals engaging in tool use in any given group. Interest level of all individuals may be an interesting spot to gauge this hypothesis. While ecological processes and pressures for tool use are mostly in hypothesis form for many animals, it is clear that ecology in combination with neuroanatomy and morphology work together to produce tool use, and work through similar ways across several species to demonstrate this form of intelligence.
We've seen functional similarities between the brains and morphologies of tool-using crows and tool-using primates, and the ecological pressures that could have led to such convergent evolution. If advanced behavior is any indication of intelligence, we hope that seeing the mechanisms behind a particular kind of this behavior, tool use, has helped in your understanding of the origins of intelligence and what's behind making an animal capable of such feats. It would be hasty to say that there is no definition of intelligence, or that no animal could be called intelligent, and we don't suggest that. Rather, intelligence should be more defined as intelligent behaviors, remembering that each behavior comes about as the result of several different processes.